Welcome to BurntMas Part 5, a tutorial on the Silent Cartographer beach skip. Beach skip is a trick that uses a rhythmic shield bump to teleport you from the beach here, all the way over to this hallway just before the locked door over here. This trick is pretty difficult, but it saves a lot of time compared to walking on the beach, between 45 to 65 seconds. I'll mainly be covering doing the trick consistently on easy difficulty. To help keep things concise, I'll put some extraneous info into big text boxes on screen, and you'll have to pause to read them if you want the more info. Let's get into it. Before we start, I've got a zip file of handy resources for learning this trick down in the description. Make sure to grab that. You'll also want to grab the latest version of HCM 3.1.7 or higher. Since this trick requires an exact subpixel to work, set your main sensitivity to 6.8 and your zoom sensitivity to this number on the screen here. Over in your Halo 1 key bindings, add a secondary binding for shooting your weapon, somewhere easy to reach on your keyboard. I like to use the number 1 myself. Extract a resource file somewhere and move the practice checkpoints into your HCM save folder. To make timing the inputs for this trick easier, we're going to set up a metronome. So start up the flow timer software from the resources, click load timers and select the beach skip timer.json file. In flow timer settings, enable global hotkeys and set the bottom option to on release. Bind the start action to the same key that you set your secondary binding for shooting your weapon in MCC. In my case, that's the number 1. What we're trying to achieve here is that when we use our secondary binding to overcharge our plasma pistol, when we release it to destroy the deployable shield, we'll also be starting the metronome's timer at the exact same time, since they're both bound to the same button. Let's get into the run itself. Be careful not to move your mouse until you're nearly out of the Pelican, as that can ruin your sensitivity manip. Coming out of the Pelican, there's a trigger we need to hit, which we can easily do by just walking backwards into the Pelican wing here. Sometimes during the walk up, zoom in with the pistol and do a single dot to the right. That's our zoom sensitivity manip. Now we need to grab some plasma grenades since we're going to be skipping triggers that spawn the gold elite. And we need at least 2 plasmas to have a decent stick stack launch later on. We're going to have to rely on the enemies on the beach to drop us the grenades we need. On easy difficulty, there's kind of an RNG manip that happens automatically as you come down in the Pelican. Either one of 2 scenarios plays out. This one which gives a guaranteed plasma, and this one which gives 2 guaranteed plasmas. Obviously the second one is better, however I don't know what causes MCC to choose between these 2 scenarios. We might have to do some more investigation to figure that out. During the walk up, you want to make sure you get a plasma pistol off a grunt somewhere. Make sure during the combat that you don't cross this 0 boundary to your left. Coming up to the shield, we're going to try to get into a very exact nook on the inside here. This is a lot easier to learn with HCM's display position info overlay. I've got the decimal precision set to 7 here. Load up into the shield nook checkpoint from the practice saves. To get into the nook consistently, we're going to need to aim at a fairly precise region. My favorite visual lineup is just to the left of this vertex here. Hold strafe right, and tap your forwards and backwards keys until you seem to lock into position. This will take a small bit of practice. At this point, sometimes we'll already be in the exact correct position, but sometimes it'll be slightly off. To make it completely consistent, continue holding strafe right and tap your forward key. Then let go of strafe right and tap the strafe right key twice. The length of each tap doesn't matter. With HCM's position overlay, you should now be in this exact position. Take note of the last 2 decimals of the Y position here. They should read 86. If they instead read 56 or some other number, you didn't do the tapping inputs correctly. There are some alternative visual lineups for this part. Note that there's at least 1 dot of leeway to each side for this lineup. Here's one using anniversary graphics aiming at the island in the background. And here's one aiming just to the left of this dark horizontal line at the bottom of threshold. This one is kind of neat because the position of the right edge of the shield on the screen can help you know whether you've locked in or not. I would recommend it, except for the fact that seeing that dark horizontal line is really hard. The contrast isn't great. In the real run, after getting into this nook, we will hold our secondary bind for firing our plasma pistol and then release it to take out the shield and simultaneously start the timer of our metronome. While the metronome timer counts down, we will then aim at our teleport lineup. And then in time with the metronome, press a specific set of rhythmic inputs. Before we get into that rhythmic stuff, I'll just quickly show you the teleport lineup. In classic graphics, the lineup is to aim just to the right of the wall here. On anniversary, the lineup is straight on the wall, but the contrast is a little lower. It's up to you which you prefer, but you'll want to switch to anniversary before the teleport anyway. Now onto the rhythmic inputs. This, in my opinion, is the hardest part of the trick. When we take out the shield with our plasma pistol, the shield will recharge exactly 210 ticks later. Much like a flood bump, the hitbox appears all at once. We need to be in an exact position, moving with an exact velocity at the moment the hitbox reappears. To achieve this, after taking out the shield, we need to do the mouse lineup we just talked about, then press jump exactly 42 ticks before the shield comes back on. Then we need to press and hold right exactly 20 ticks before the shield comes back on. In HCM 3.1.7, I've added a new feature that will tell you exactly when you actually hit each input relative to the shield coming back online. This is the shield input printer. So for the trick to work, the numbers we want to see in the readout are jumping at T-42 and then moving right at T-20. Any other values and the teleport will not work. The values I've given you for the flow timer metronome will play out a series of 13 beeps. Here they are on a timeline. The first 8 beats are just to help you lock into the rhythm. The 9th beat is when you need to press jump. The 11th beat is when you need to move right. Now we don't need a metronome to pull this off, but unfortunately there's not any good visual cues in game for when the shield is about to regenerate. Now practicing this in game with the shield input printer is all well and good, but you'll only get feedback in the form of being out by whole game ticks or not. To help you measure more precisely how to hit these beats, I've written a PowerShell script for practicing. Simply copy paste the contents of this script into a PowerShell command prompt and run it. Do some test runs and you'll see that it tells you exactly how many milliseconds you are out from hitting the timing exactly correctly, which will then convert into a probability of success. Now these probabilities, the way input polling works in game, it occurs in 33 millisecond chunks. These are game ticks. When you let go of your weapon firing secondary's bind, that input will only be processed on the next game tick, which could take anywhere from between 0 to 33 milliseconds depending on when you let go of the button. Since flow timer is running completely independently of the game, then metronome will also be out of sync with the game then by between 0 to 33 milliseconds. Now the math behind the success probabilities is complicated, but to sum it up, if you can hit the beat with perfect accuracy, a delta of 0 milliseconds, you will have a 100% chance of getting the correct tick. However, if instead you are more than 33 milliseconds out to either side, you will have a 0% chance of success. An important point, however, is that everyone's reaction speed is different, and different computers also have different amounts of audio latency. If you find yourself being consistently off the beat by the same amount in the same direction each time, you will want to compensate for this by adding or subtracting the appropriate amount from the flow timer offset until it works best for you. By now, I'll assume that you've managed to get the teleport in practice at least a few times. You might notice that if you continue holding jump during the teleport setup, you'll jump after teleporting as well. This can be good or bad depending on your preference. I've got a practice save here that's in the middle of the Rhythmic inputs, where all you have to do is hold rightwards while you load the save and you'll get the teleport. Use this save to experiment with landing on the platform and whether or not to jump. If you don't jump through the teleport, you ought to be able to land on the platform by letting go of strafe at the correct time. If you jump mid-teleport instead, you'll have more time to adjust your positioning and look downwards. However, the anniversary visuals are really quite awful. It's actually quite hard to see what you're doing with the jump strat. Be careful of crouch landing too close to the back here since it's slightly slanted, and it will likely cause you to slide off. Landing on this platform will take a decent amount of practice, but once you've got it down, it's pretty easy. It's kind of like landing on the beam in TNR belly skip in that respect. Once we're on the platform, we need to hit the BSP load from out of bounds. To do this, crouch and hold backwards in this little nook, while looking away from the hallway. Then while still holding crouch and backwards, tap rightwards to rub against the right edge here. This should give you the load pretty quickly. Once we've hit the load, we've got 2 ways to fall through out of bounds to get to the map room. The first way is just to completely YOLO it. This is more of an IL strat. There's a couple of different spots we can bounce off of here on the way down to try to survive the fall, but it's really, really difficult. You don't want to do this unless you're going for the IL recce. However, since we still got the sensitivity manip from before, we've got a way to do this 100% safe using a setup fall. First, we want to make sure we get ourselves stuck in the back of this V nook here while still crouching. While continuing to hold crouch, turn right and aim at this exact line up here. There's no leeway. Then while still holding crouch the whole time, begin holding backwards as well. If you don't change your inputs or move your mouse during the fall, you should land completely safely on the ground here. If you've made it to this point of 2 plasma grenades, you can go for your usual stick stack setup. For IL runs though, you'll definitely want to go for a shafted launch. Just keep in mind that since we skipped the shafted trigger earlier, it's still active, so make sure you spam your plasma pistol as you come up to it. Since we might have more than 2 plasma grenades though, I've spent some time looking into alternate setups that can make use of that. Here's a free plasma setup I've been experimenting with. The timing to pull this off is super tight, so in some ways it's kinda harder, but with enough practice I find this makes the shafted launch a fair bit more consistent. By which I mean like 1 in 4 instead of 1 in 20. If you're particularly insane, you can also start the setup while running, which honestly isn't quite as hard as it looks, but your mileage may vary. If you want to get a safety checkpoint for full game, your only option really is to kill all the enemies on the beach. These guys in the back in particular are really annoying to deal with. Just make sure you don't zoom in while you're fighting these guys with the pistol, and to save at least 4 frags and 2 plasmas. But trusting those marines to kill anything besides grunts is a bit hit or miss. On Legendary, unlike on Easy, you can't just ignore the enemies, they will murder you. You want to take out the first elite as soon as possible, and then also the second elite. This should hopefully panic the grunts long enough for you to do the trick. Or you could just kill everything and get the safety checkpoint. At least you'll get plenty of grenades on Legendary. Killing everything takes like 20 seconds though, so you're not left with a lot of time save after that. On co-op, we can go even faster. Since the player in the right Pelican is closer to the shield, he can get there sooner. And the player in the regular Pelican can handle running back and hitting the Beach 2 trigger for him. Luckily, the host will get the right Pelican spawn, and thus won't have to deal with input lag. The only important thing is that right at the start when you gain control of your mouse, you need to quickly turn to the left to avoid getting shunted by the right side of the Pelican's cargo bay. Otherwise your view angle will be different and not consistent. Now, you might be wondering if this trick actually works on gearbox too. Well, the shield nook is in a slightly different position, so you need a very slightly different subpixel angle, but yes it works. In practice though, I don't know any way to actually sensitivity manip to that correct value on gearbox version. So this trick that I'm calling the Rhythmic shield bump, where we use a metronome to precisely teleport ourselves with a deployable shield, there's other levels where RSBs might come in handy in the future. I just haven't found the setups for them yet. If it's any consolation, none of them would save anywhere near as much time as this does. I'll quickly run through the ones I think might be possible. At the shield we use for stair skip, I reckon it might be possible to get a teleport directly to the load zone and save 10 seconds or so worth of platforming. The only problem is that unless we slow down for a pistol at the bridge, there's no way to do a zoom sensitivity manip. On AOTCR Easy, it might be possible to use one of these shields to teleport all the way to the load zone. Only on Easy though, because on Legendary there's a mandatory trigger in the hallway that we need to hit, otherwise the Banshee doesn't spawn. In this room after Camo Jumo on Guilty Spark, there is actually a shield on this upper level that it might be possible to teleport to the last lift with. At the start of 2 Betrayals it might be possible to use one of these 2 shields to teleport all the way down to the Banshee. The only issue is I still have to hit these 2 triggers here, so it wouldn't even save that much time. So a few miscellaneous things before we wrap up. So obviously you want to switch to anniversary graphics before you do the teleport so that you'll be able to see out of bounds. But if it's your first time switching to anniversary graphics on this level, such as during a full game run, the switch will cause you to freeze for a quarter second or so, and it'll then ruin your timing for the rhythmic inputs. To avoid this, make sure you switch to anniversary graphics then back to classic sometime before taking out the shield. You might be wondering if FPS manips have anything to do with this trick, and yeah, with the correct FPS manips, it's possible to make the rhythmic inputs 100% consistent instead of like 1 in 3, which would be super useful for full game runs, for example. However, since I suspect the community will ban mid-run FPS changing, I haven't included the details about that setup in this video. But if instead the community does allow FPS changing, I'll do a short follow-up video explaining the setup. Speaking of speedrun rules, you might be wondering if the use of a metronome like I've described here with double bound keybinds is above board or not. I actually brought this up with the community half a year ago, and most people seem to reckon it was fine. However, if we change our mind, the trick is still kind of doable without double binding. It just becomes insanely difficult. I haven't quite figured out the setup yet, but it would involve something like having a metronome running in the background the whole time at between 160 to 170 BPM. We'd have to take out the shield on beat or on like a half a beat or something. Then we'd have to press our rhythmic inputs on the correct beat or even correct half a beat. The numbers just don't work out very cleanly, so we have to do some weird offbeat stuff. I should also add that releasing the primary fire button, well, releasing a button in general to a beat is a lot harder than pressing a button on a beat. Frankly, I don't think it'd be very practical of a setup outside of like a 1 in 1,000 IL strat. I'd probably want to instead look into trying to find an alternate setup involving buffered jump inputs, but that's a whole other story. Alright, that's about it for this video. So what's next for old Bernie here? Well, as I've mentioned, there's still some new tricks I need to find setups for. I think the whole 6.8 and zoom manips for sub-pixel perfect lineups is going to unlock some whole new worlds of possibility that we haven't even imagined yet. But I'm gonna not go quite as hard on it as I have this last month or so, where I spent like every free minute working on BurntMas and the setup for this trick. Need to pace myself a little better, work on some other stuff too. Like HCM. I really want to get up in the guts of HCM and rework the code a bunch. Not really adding any new features or anything, or even necessarily like fixing bugs, but like, just, you know, it helps my mental health to know that it's good under the hood. Speaking of code, I might look into switching careers sometime this year. I've been working in retail for a while, and geez, this last Christmas got me a bit burnt out. Gah. And God, there's so much media consumption I've put on the back burner these last couple months. I just got a lot to catch up on. Oh, and working on music. I've long been into making various musics, but only recently I've been trying to learn how to make breakcore jungly stuff. All the music that you've heard in these last 5 videos was from yours truly. Eventually I'll probably put them up on SoundCloud somewhere once I'm happy with them. I'll probably chuck a link in the description once I get around to that. And I reckon the Silent Cartographer Easy IL recce could probably go as low as like 145 or so. Maybe I've not completely retired from Halo speedrunning yet. Might still be a little more left in me. We'll see. Anyway, have a Merry BurntMas and a Happy New Year. I'll see you then.